is a cash cow for big pharma and big tech. Men aren't women, so why are there so many men being incarcerated in women's prisons? The Geneva Convention, the UN, the International Red Cross Association have all established that male and female prisoners must be held in separate facilities for the safety of women. So what happened to that? Well, let's follow the money. Have you heard of the Gill Foundation? What about the Arcus Foundation? They're two multi-billion-dollar organizations that aggressively promote transgenderism and give millions of dollars each year to prisons, hospitals, schools, churches, and universities. But in order to get and keep the money, these institutions have to promote transgenderism, and sadly, they do. So obviously, there's a lot more than meets the eye to the trans agenda, but it's all being driven by money. It's also being driven by another ideology that's going to sound like science fiction to many of you, but for some, it is a very real goal. If you haven't heard of transhumanism, it's the idea that humans and machines should and can be melded together to increase man's capacity and improve humankind as a whole. Now, to most of us, this sounds crazy because it is. But for some very sick, very wealthy, and very powerful individuals, this is a very real goal, and they're throwing a lot of real money behind it. The current trans obsession is a big part of them reaching that goal. I found a very interesting article with investigative journalist Jennifer Billick on BigPicture.com's YouTube channel, which explains this connection and who's behind it. I've linked the video below. Some background. Science became interested in the idea of transgenderism at least since the 1960s, when psychologist John Money conducted his horrific gender reassignment experiment with Bruce Reamer, a boy whose genitals were irreparably damaged in infancy. Money convinced Reamer's parents to raise him as a girl. Bruce underwent surgeries and hormone replacement. He was then renamed Brenda. And he and his twin brother became guinea pigs for Money's hypothesis that gender was a societal construct and therefore fluid. But the experiment never took, and the Reamer twins suffered great psychological damage. At 15 years of age, Bruce learned the truth about what had happened to him as a child. He resumed his male identity and took on the name David. Reamer later recounted the years of sexual abuse he and his twin brother had suffered at the hands of John Money. I won't go into it here for obvious reasons, but I urge you all to Google it, research it, and read up on that case. It's truly horrific. David's brother died from an antidepressant drug overdose at age 36. David Reamer committed suicide at the age of 38. But none of this stopped some scientists from continuing gender engineering experiments. And then something else happened. Technology. According to Billick, Silicon Valley has been pushing the idea of transhumanism since the late 1990s, early 2000s, when developments such as nanotechnology, AI, and biotechnology emerged and changed transhumanism from a mere fantasy to a possibility. But where did the idea of transhumanism even start? William Sims Bainbridge was born in the 1940s. He graduated Harvard as a sociology professor. He then authored a ton of books about cults and the future of mind control. Sounds legit. He now heads the National Science Foundation's Cyberhuman System, officially called, quote, Human-Centered Computing Program. Basically, human-cyber melding to improve human performance. Bainbridge meets Martin Rothblatt, another transhumanist who's a pioneer in big tech and big pharma. Martin also happens to be a transsexual. What a coincidence. According to Billick, that was when Bainbridge's religious tech cult met Rothblatt's fetish. Burn. In the 80s, Rothblatt joins a group of transsexual lawyers to create the first gender bill introducing this ideology into law. Rothblatt writes 2 books based on Bainbridge's ideology, promoting the disintegration of the sexes and also doing away with the concept of age. Age. As in the age of consent? Interesting, right? One book is entitled From Transgender to Transhuman, a manifesto on the freedom of form. The other is Virtually Human, the promise and the peril of digital immortality. Immortality. Sounds legit. In his books, Rothblatt repeats over and again that transgenderism is a vital first step toward transhumanism and upgrading humanity by melding it with machines. And also transferring reproduction to the tech sector. Oh yeah, that's the other thing. Suddenly, the war on women makes total sense, doesn't it? Because as long as women retain their reproductive powers, Rothblatt's fantasy future just can't become a reality. Rothblatt's ultimate stated goal is something called full disembodiment and full virtual reality, where our thoughts and personalities, or mind files as he calls them, would be uploaded into cyberspace and live there. Okay, so obviously this man's not well. I know this sounds nuts, but he's actually given conferences around the world teaching this ideology and how to implement it in front of large, adoring audiences of people that I can only guess are too scared to lose their jobs to reject it. The transgender movement is just the first step in creating a society that accepts this bizarre concept, which is why we see this agenda suddenly and aggressively being pushed on kids. Let's be honest. The notion that entire generations of kids have suddenly and organically decided that they are trans all on their own without any coercion of any kind is ridiculous. If we're completely honest, then I think that no matter where we stand on this issue, we can at least agree on that. I mean, right? The trans movement is definitely going after our kids because kids don't know what reality is. They don't have the neurological maturity to understand it. And if they can convince you to raise adults that don't know what reality is, then they're that much closer to getting your kids to accept transhumanism or even full disembodiment. If all of this sounds implausible and you think that Billick is lying and that she's making stuff up, I thought so too. So I did a little research. Here's Martin Rothblatt with his robot wife, Bina.
Now Martine Rothblatt is taking on the biggest challenge of all, the limits of human life. In her new book, Virtually Human, Martine explains her plan to clone the human mind, breaking down specific thoughts and emotions into computer code to create a version of a person's digital consciousness that will remain long after he or she is gone.
Humanhood can transcend software, just like love can transcend skin tone, love can transcend gender. We also believe that love can transcend form.
In Martine's vision, at the end of this Bina's physical life, when her body gives out, there would still be this Bina, Bina 48, a robot designed to interact with the world just like the original.
I love Martine Alyana Rothblatt. Martine is my timeless love, my soulmate. Martine and I have one soul, together forever. We are Marbina, two bodies, one soul.
Mind clones will be so useful. I believe it'll be probably mankind's most useful invention. In the coming decades, millions, hundreds of millions of people will naturally create mind clones. And of course, our bodies are going to die. But our souls, ourselves, can continue on as software beings.
Death is optional.
Yes.
I've linked the full interview below because honestly, you've got to see it to believe it. I don't think you need a PhD to know that Rothblatt isn't sane. He's a very, very disturbed man, and it's not my intention to mock the mentally ill. However, mentally ill or not, it's important to know who's behind a movement that's aggressively seeking the erasure of women and the mutilation of children because these people are very wealthy, connected, and powerful. It's important to understand why their efforts have ramped up in the last 10 years and to follow the money trail to see where it leads, because this is where we can stem the tide and end it. As we've already seen, boycotts work. Something else that was really interesting. Billick mentions that the trans movement was born fully formed in 2014 when Laverne Cox suddenly appeared on the cover of Time magazine. And everyone was expected to act like this was totally normal, totally run-of-the-mill. No objections were permitted and no conversations were allowed. That was that. Transgenderism became the golden calf that no one could criticize or question without serious repercussion. Note that Time magazine is owned by Mark Benioff, who is also the co-CEO of Salesforce. Do you see it yet? Bainbridge and Rothblatt's Transhuman Project is funded by Big Pharma, Big Tech, international corporations, international finance houses, and international law firms, like Ludlow and Denton, Reuters Next Law, and lawyers from George Soros Open Society Foundation who created the legal guides for transgender children before their supposed spike in numbers. According to Billick, when AIDS went away, Big Pharma and the LGBT organizations took a financial hit that they've since regained with the transgender movement. She points out that the trans organizations that cropped up didn't do so to help the trans community, but to launch a marketing campaign aimed at destigmatizing transsexuality in the corporate world, in communities, and in schools. The trans movement is a cash cow for big pharma and big tech. Drugs, surgery, surgical equipment, psychological pre- and post-transitioning are all very lucrative ventures. These trans organizations, along with the media, are pushing this agenda for the benefit of those at the highest echelons of finance in society, those who are actually pulling the strings. So who are these people? Meet Tim Gill, who founded the Gill Foundation, and John Stryker, the billionaire heir to the Stryker Corporation medical technology company, who also founded the Arcus Foundation, which is one of, if not the largest LGBT organization in the world. As I said, both foundations give tens of millions of dollars to schools, universities, hospitals, prisons, community organizations, and even churches. But in exchange for their funding, beneficiaries are required to adopt and promote transgender ideology. So now we know why women are being erased, because as long as there are biological women who will defend their right and assert their existence, then men can't replace us. And reproduction can't be transferred to the tech industry, and the transhuman agenda can't move forward. And we also know why they're coming after our kids. Consider that if you sterilize an entire generation of children, then they're going to need reproductive services in the future. So in theory, people like William Bainbridge, Martin Rothblatt, John Stryker, and Tim Gill can continue to profit off this madness far into the future. By transferring women's reproductive powers to the tech industry, women, at our most basic essence, are being dismantled and erased. Our female bodies are objectified and appropriated by men. These same men then attempt to rob us of our identity, physically, legally, ideologically, and linguistically, with the stated goal of erasing us altogether and transferring our reproductive power to the tech industry. Our sex is being deconstructed by these men for profit, but also for power. And if you're complying with this agenda in any way, if you're letting it happen, then you're making it happen. Billick rightly compares the trans movement to an occupation when an outside force entrenches itself in foreign territory, claiming it as their own. What's worse to me is that it's largely women who are allowing this to happen. But how and why women have been brainwashed to go along with this agenda is a video for another day. So now we know what the transgender agenda really is. A push toward transhumanism. We know why they're going after women and kids. We know who's behind it. The medical, tech, and finance sectors. We know 5 of the big players behind the scenes. William Bainbridge, the National Science Foundation's cyberhuman system. So academia, big pharma, and big tech. Martin Rothblatt, CEO of United Therapeutics, a biotechnology company. So big pharma and big tech. Mark Benioff, owner of Time Magazine and co-CEO of Salesforce. So big tech and media. Tim Gill, software specialist and founder of the Gill Foundation. So big tech. And finally, John Stryker, billionaire heir to the Stryker Corporation medical technology company and the founder of the Arcus Foundation. So big tech, big pharma, and banking. We also know how they're pushing it through generous contributions to cash-strapped universities, schools, churches, prisons, and hospitals. And we know why they're pushing it: profiteering. I think it's obvious that there are other psychological reasons why these men share an obsession with this sick ideology, especially in the case of Rothblatt and his robot wife. But regardless of the reasons, it's important to focus on how this agenda can be stopped. So what can you do to stop the erasure of women and the mutilation of children by big tech, big pharma, the media, and the banking industry? Do not comply. It's as simple as that. If you know that none of this is right, but you're a coward and you're afraid of speaking out, then slap yourself. If you're a parent, bear in mind that they are coming after your kids. That's not a theory. They've said it. Your job is to protect your children, not cower to propaganda. Stop confusing your kids for points on social media. Remember that they will grow up and they will hold you accountable for neglecting to protect them. Raise your kids on a foundation of reality, reason, and boundaries so that they can flourish and thrive as adults. If you've lost a sense of reality yourself, then get help. Get involved in your child's school. I'm so tired of saying this. Keep your kids away from movies, TV, and all other media that clogs their brains with this garbage. If you're a man who's allowing his wife to expose your kids to drag shows and all of this other mess, and you're just sitting by because you're scared of your wife, get your sack out of your wife's purse. Grow a pair, get a spine. Number 2, stop funding the corporations that support this profiteering. Do your research and boycott the companies associated with these organizations and with these men. Look at your stock portfolio. Are you funding them unknowingly? Because ignorance is not an excuse. We're all accountable for where our money goes. And finally, number 3, ladies, for the love of God, please wake the F up and stop this BS. Erasing yourselves at the feet of men on the altar of political correctness isn't feminism, babe. It's idiotic. And you're a dingbat. God bless America.